Ankita.
This is Nalini.
And we are the Prickly Peers, the pod where we discuss uninhibited brown women and their prickly points of views. I'm not going to say anything more right now, Nalini, over to you.
In today's episode, our uninhibited brown woman that we are celebrating is Ankita. But our first season is about what our mothers said when we were growing up that made a big difference in our lives in a maybe not very positive way, or things that irked us, things that we found we debated and rebelled against, and then got our ways eventually, or for better or for worse, turned out to be as prickly as we are because of that. So, Ankita, I want to first know what is that thing that your mother said that's on your mind, and then we go back to your childhood. So tell me, what did your mother say?
My mother said, "You don't even know how to make tea. How are you ever going to get married?" Of all the things she said, nothing has irked me more. A, I'm not a traditional chai consumer, right? So I drink tea, but I take tea without milk and sugar and so on. And I don't understand the point of learning to make something that I don't consume. Now, I understand if I was to be a brilliant host, which I'm still on the journey on, I would know how to make everything my guests would consume, but I'm not there yet. And the second thing is, I do not understand. Well, now I do based on the media and conversation with friends, but the connection between my ability to make tea and get married. Like for me, it was the most absurd thing, and there is nothing that irks me more than this sentence.
And does she still say this?
Well, her frustration at my inability to make chai is still very much existent,
It's evident.
and she still says you don't even know how to make tea, but now it's the second part of the sentence differs. She'll say, how are you ever going to take care of your parents? How are you ever going to get married? How are a whole bunch of things which are based on my ability to make tea.
Yeah. And just to clarify, are you married at the time of this recording?
I'm not. So that sentence is still very valid.
Yeah, so let's see where time takes us or whether your mother was right. But for now, tell me a bit about your childhood. How was it growing up? Anything that you want to share?
Well, I think I've had a very, very privileged childhood. We lived in many different cities, consequence of being an army kid, which I loved. I would cry every time we changed cities and schools and everything else, but it was just so normal for us to move around, for everyone I was studying with to move around. And it was all like life was one big adventure. And my parents would always kick me out of the house. Like they would be like, you would go to school, you would come back, you would eat a meal, take a tiny nap, and then your parents would be like, get out of the house, you need to like go outdoors, play, do something. I loved my childhood. If I could recreate it, I would. I wouldn't change a thing. But yeah, that's a little bit about it.
And do you have siblings?
I do. I have an elder sister. She's 12 years older to me, so I have the privilege of having two moms.
Oh, 12 years. Wow. That's a big difference.
Yeah, and she would give Gandhiji competition in non-violence. So I would literally like sit on her lap. So she would be carrying me around, and I would pull her hair, and she would like still be carrying me on her lap and be like, "Mama, she is pulling my hair," and my mom would be like, "Drop her, just drop her." And my sister's like, "No, I can't drop her."
And while growing up, so did your sister have a different experience than what you did? So you talked about your childhood where you were out of the house like as soon as you came back from school, which means like they were inculcating an adventurous kid in you totally. How was it for your sister?
I think it was similar. I never paid attention to her life as much because she was obviously so much older. She had her own world. She would sometimes take me for movies with her friends, and I'd be just like, what am I doing? Like, they're such old people.
And she wanted to take you.
No, like
which is
sometimes she would be like, I will be a nice elder sister. Her friends used to adore me. Like, even today, we run into some of her friends and they'd be like, oh, we remember you, you were such a tiny baby. So my sister was really proud of me, and she would like really have her friends meet me and everything else. But I just she was also in boarding school before I was born, or when I was born. So she's had a whole set of adventures of her own,
which were not necessarily in front of you, right? Like you did not see that part of her growing up.
Yeah.
So when you were of an age where you could recollect things and what you could remember from then on, like, was your sister ever setting examples like that your mother would consider, like, right, that's the right thing, because I'm an elder sister in my house, and I've realized that over time parents are always comparing the kids, even though, like, they don't want to. Do you think there were things that your sister was doing that was considered like the thing to do, and then you followed and you weren't doing any of that?
Not that I recall. Like I would always say I was the kid who wanted to be perfect, like teachers' pet, parents to be proud of. So I think there would be examples that I did that my parents would have quoted to my sister. But I do remember, like, in terms of music, my sister has a much more refined taste in music. And I would go like Backstreet Boys, Boyzone, and all of that. And my parents would be like, "Listen to like the music your sister listens to. She listens to Elaine Page, plays the guitar," and I'd be just like, no, my music is better."
So in all these things, it looks like your parents were very, like, encouraging of extracurriculars and, like, doing things beyond, which, like, because I know you as a person, I know that your mom pushes you even today to do things outside of work and, like, getting out of your comfort zone. But I'm just trying to think, let's say, when did she start saying this tea comment in your life? Like, when was the first time you remember that you heard it from her? How old were you?
Well, I think she said, well, she wanted me to learn how to make tea from when I was in my teens. But it was never, obviously, at that point, she never said, make tea and then you'll get married kind of thing. But it was always like, oh, you need to learn making tea because that's, I don't know whether it was same in your family, but it was like the first step as introduction into the kitchen and learning how to cook. And I was never interested in making tea. Like,
And it's complex, right? Like, the Indian chai is one of the most complex things to get right
you
in the
will not
kitchen.
believe this, Nalini. During just pre-pandemic, I think it was 2019, one of my friends was home. She was a fellow AITN. And my mom said, "Why don't you make tea for us?" And I was like, "Oh, no, she doesn't drink tea." And she was like, obviously, she loves to pull my leg. And she's like, "No, no, I'll drink tea if you make it. I of course, drink tea." So, obviously, and there's a video recording of this. I was making tea and they were just giggling my measurements of water to milk ratio, when I was putting the tea leaves in, how long I was letting it boil, where I was putting the sugar in. And it is a hilarious video, except that this thing of just like the importance of being able to make tea, I can't get over it.
Tell me more about when this seems to be a recent example, but then when you were a child, like, how old were you, do you think, when you were introduced into the kitchen?
I would say 15, 16. That was when they said, learn how to make tea.
And why? Like, I remember for my household, like, nobody was that big fan of a tea. Like, my parents wanted the first tea as the first thing in the morning. But, in the army, there are people, I don't know if that's, like, still happens or not, but there would be people that would do everything for you, including, like, knocking on your bedroom door, which sort of, like, invades on privacy now that you think about it. But back then, like, the sayak would stand with tea in the morning, at even if it's at 5 a.m. And then, even then, this same thing happened to me, where they were like, you need to make tea, like, if you want to start your cooking journey. And then I was, first of all, never interested in the kitchen, and I argued, the prickly kind that I always was. I argued that I don't have tea, I'm never going to have tea, and I don't know if that's the reason why both of us and many women like us still don't have tea, just to prove that one point that we said ages ago to our parents. But I'll tell you what my parents said back then. Like, for them, it was importance of hosting in the army, right? Like, as you touched upon it also. And what will you give people when they come to your house? And I was like, there's so many other things, like, people in the army drink beer more than they drink tea, and, like, the country that we live in now, like, drinks more beer than they drink tea. But yeah, but it was never really, like, a valid argument in their mind when their child said that they don't want to ever drink tea, or, like, they will offer other things to their guests, because Atiti Devo Bhava was, like, such an important thing, and apparently God's drink tea. So that's why they want this to happen. But yeah, like, was your experience the same?
It was similar. So in our house, and even today, drinking tea in the evenings is a tradition, right? So they take a little afternoon nap, wake up, and then drink tea. So it was never the morning tea that I was expected to contribute towards. It was like, oh, it's evening, why don't you make us some tea? Or like, come watch me make tea. And it was obviously my mom wouldn't spend a lot of time in the kitchen back then because we had a cook and everything else. But this was like her saying, I'll make it, you watch, and then you make it, I'll watch, we'll do this together, but you need to learn how to make tea. And it was never like, come, I'll show you how to make rice or like vegetables. Like that came much later. I think tea was the first thing. Like I think it was always like, yeah, okay, I need to know how to make tea. It's all right. Like in theory, I still know the theory of making chai, so I can probably make chai, but I don't know how edible it'll be. Um, but it was just as the years grew. I think when I was 25, it was just like, you still don't know how to make tea. How are you going to get married? And I was just like, huh? Like, when did that transition happen? And that's when it started really getting to me. And I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to learn how to make this thing, especially if it's going to dictate whether, I'm marriage worthy or
Where
not.
do you think this was coming from? Like your mom, who's an author herself, like has done all the things that prickly women of her generation would do. I just like, I cannot fathom where this could be coming from. So maybe like let's try to unbundle this together. What do you think was driving her to these kind of comments?
I think she always thought of it as a joke. Like it was always like, oh, you need to learn make to make tea, but then obviously the marriage thing came when I was of marriageable age and so on, right? So even if you ask her today, I don't think she'll be like, oh, I was just joking, right? I wasn't saying it in all seriousness. Like the serious part was like, I think it's time you learn how to make tea. But the whatever came after it was just like, oh my god, like we say so many things, you shouldn't take all of it seriously. And I have had this conversation. Like I've told her, like enough's enough. Like that's the silliest statement I've heard. And she would say, like, oh, every mom says it. Like in every Indian family, I'm sure each mom has said it to her daughter. So she never told me the connection between tea and marriage, right? So I turned to media, our movies, TV series, conversation with friends, and the connection between tea and marriage became very evident there, right? So, and I'm sure it still happens in some parts of the country where when I'm going to refer to them as the olden times, but when you were getting married through an arranged marriage system, the boy's family would come to the girl's house to meet the family. And the girl would traditionally, like, especially in the movies, there would always be a big dupatta over her face, so they can't see the face. And she would come in at the right time with a tray of tea and snacks. And then I clearly remember these movie scenes where, the boy's father would pick up and take a sip and be like, oh, your daughter makes really good tea.
And somehow the boy's father has to drink this first. Like
Exactly.
it's not for the
Yeah,
guy.
the
The
guy will
boy.
be quiet in the corner. He has no say in the decision, anyways, like the parents who are deciding who marries who. So at that point of time, it was important that the tea be good, right? If the tea is bad, like the relationship is off. There's no marriage that will follow. So if things were still that way, I understand the importance of making tea. But like that was never going to happen in my family. That didn't happen for my sister. I don't recall her ever having a dupatta over her head, carrying a tray, and coming in with tea. And it's definitely not going to happen in my case. But the sentence stuck, like the importance and the association with tea stuck, right? So I think that's where it came from, like the original connection and the idea into my mom's head that, oh, maybe I can put these two together and they would make a concrete sentence.
Or like, yeah, definitely she was not thinking. Like it's a generational thing, I guess. Like it's just every generation has one of those things that they say. For them, this was one of them. Like I still remember the movie Bend It Like Beckham, where aloo gobi, making aloo gobi was such a big thing for the actor's mom, where she kept telling, I don't remember what the name of the girl was. I think Simran or some Punjabi name, where like she was being told that if you don't know how to make aloo gobi, you cannot find a husband. And this was a family living in the UK for this was the second generation they were living in the UK for, and even then they are talking of aloo gobi as the main deciding factor of someone getting married or not, or finding a good husband. You did say olden times, Ankita, but like I'm from Bihar, right? So I still have family there, and this situation that you described and worse is still happening today for sure in parts of India, many parts of India, like where people, I don't know if because that has been the norm for so long and it still happens, and there's like TV ads and everything that are centered, CPG companies are like, consumer goods are sold this way, like where every third or fourth ad, I would think, like is about an arranged marriage, like meetup, where people are eating, or like the sunflower oil that you used to fry samosas will be in a setup where arranged marriage. So clearly the importance of food and beverages in this case has been so important to our generations. But it's just, it boggles me that even today there are like, this is happening. So like, tell me more about what effect did it have on you, like, or at least what do you think this led you to do in life? Like, it's your rebellion against making chai. Okay, you do not, I know that you're always, I think you still have a coffee somewhere there, right? Like that's your coffee. Is drinking coffee your rebellion, or like, what do you think happened?
If she had said, need to know how to, you need to learn to cook so that you can take care of yourself because it's healthier, and came up with all of that, I would be much more open to listening to her, right? But this sentence irked me so much because I know that there was this huge pressure of getting married anyway. Like there's this thing of get married, get married, get married. And then there's this thing of make tea, make tea. And I'm just like, I would snap at her. Like there are a number of times when she said this, and I would snap at her. And then now, even if I can make chai, even if I can do it for them, right? Like when they wake up after a nap, go in like a nice daughter and do something nice for them. I would not. Like I would probably do something else. But because of the association that they've attached to just making chai, I'm just like, I don't want to do it. Like I don't want to learn how to make it. If someone makes great tea and offers it to me, I will drink it. But I'm not gonna be the one who sits and does that. Because in my head it's just that it's created friction that otherwise may not have existed. So, and I think that's the thing. Like if I was to tell another younger woman, I would tell her to make chai or make tea so that she can sustain herself, but I'm not going to attach it to these things that aren't as important, such as the association between making tea and getting married. I think that needs to stop. We need to unconsciously stop propagating the whole thing of arranged marriage and of being judged as a person based on trivial things.
This was a thing when women were not earning, had their own salaries, and they weren't bringing home money. Like these, this was the only way they could contribute to the household. But today, like, and it must be generational in some way, where like when my mom used to say this about cooking and tea and everything, and I got married, and the first time I went to my husband's house, the natural thing was to make tea for the in-laws. And like, I again use the same argument which I did like when I was 12 years old, I think, that, oh sorry, I don't have chai, so I cannot make it for you because I would not be good at it. And that's how I got away with it. And maybe like in another universe, you and I would be having this conversation over chai. But because of the innate need to rebel against these things that we like equate to, we might be feeling that having chai is sort of anti-feminist in some way, or I don't know the kind of impact it has had on us. But it does definitely go beyond just chai and tea and cooking. Like who knows, like more Indian women would be better cooks today if we were never if people, girls weren't driven to the kitchen forcefully to be able to get
Yeah, and I
married.
think to that point also is the scene that you painted with your in-laws. Like I'm sure when you said I don't have chai, they were just like, like otherwise it would be normal. Like, oh yeah, that's a sensible thing. Like you don't drink chai, probably don't need to know how to make it. But just the shock impact it has when you tell the older generation, I don't know how to make chai, and they're like, what?
And like I can make you other things, and I can, of course, I've been surviving by myself in a foreign country for all these years. Nobody cooked for me here, so I do all of that. But no, like chai is so important. Yeah. But I think like enough rambling about chai in general. Like I think we have established that it goes much beyond. It's time that we realize that the things that we say about supposedly mundane things is it can have long lasting effects on children. And
Even the jokes we make, right?
yeah,
Like
I think,
this was intended to be taken lightly by my mom, but when you repeat something, I don't know, 5, 10 times, it's no longer just a joke. You start thinking more about it, and you're just like, there's something there because she's saying it again and again.
yeah. So on this note, I think I would just like to thank you for sharing your story, and you will, I think, over the rest of the episodes and the time we spend together, I think it would be great to know, like, we would get to know your mom and her stories, and maybe like we will try to decipher where this came from in the following episodes. But for now, it's ciao from us. And Ankita, do you have any closing lines?
That's it from me.
And me too. Ciao. See you.